great. Hi, Brendan. Thanks for being on the channel with me today.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad we can finally were able to make this work. It's been a bit of back and forth, but thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, no, it's awesome. I'm so glad to have you on today. So can you please just tell us about yourself a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that don't know, my name is Brendan, or on Instagram, Whisky Blender, Whisky with no E, Blender with no E. I am a distiller, blender, brewer, jack of all trades in that sense. Originally, I started off as a brewer in Canada at Driftwood Brewing Company, and then got my way into the craft distilling world through in Scotland, and then into blending Scotch malt whiskey at Brown-Forman's distilleries, Glendronach, Benriach, and Glenglassaugh. And as of a month and a half ago, I'm back in Canada, starting a distillery with the team from Driftwood, and we will be releasing some pretty incredible stuff in the near future.
Wow, that's quite the resume you have there.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey, learning lots and getting to taste a lot of good products, so can't complain.
Yeah. So can you tell us how you initially got into brewing and then made the move to Scotland?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think kind of an alternative way to get into it. You see a lot of people these days are, doing the right thing. They're going to school, learning all the science behind everything and getting their foot into breweries and distilleries that way. I did not do that. I was at university studying history because I was going to go to law school, and that was my plan, and that's what was happening. And to pay my way through school, I was working at a brew pub in Victoria, Canada called Canoe Brew Pub, and we had a master brewer there by the name of Sean Hoyne, who, after a few years of working together at Canoe, he ended up opening his own brewery called Hoyne Brewery in Victoria. Then we brought in a new brewmaster named Dan Murphy. Dan Murphy came to us from Lighthouse, and when Dan was starting, I saw an opportunity to maybe learn more about brewing, and just asked him if there's anything I could do in the cellar to help out, make his job easier. If you've ever been to Canoe, you'll notice they sell a lot of beer, and it's a lot of work for one brewer. So he took me under his wing and taught me a few things about brewing, and I was like, oh, this is a lot of fun. But when I graduated university, I was like, I've got to go to the oil fields or something to make some money before I go to law school. And I told Dan, I was like, hey, Dan, won't be able to help you out on weekends anymore. And he just kind of planted the seed in my head of, well, you know what you should do is you should give the guys at Driftwood Brewing a shout. They might be hiring. And I was a little intimidated. I'd never brewed beer before. I'd been in the cellar and all of that, but Driftwood was just approaching, I think, their 5-year anniversary. They were making some pretty killer beers. So a little apprehensive, but I was like, okay, I'll go over there and, put my name in the hat and see what happens. And ended up having a beer with those guys, and they offered me a brewing position. And I was just like, guys, I don't know how to brew. is that okay? And they're like, oh, absolutely, we'll teach you. So they got me started on, scrubbing kegs and then filling kegs. And then I got onto the bottling line of filling bottles, and I was loading bottles, and then through the cellar, and ended up getting into the brew house. And I brewed there for 5 years. We got to play with sours, lots of different styles of beers, which was a ton of fun. And kind of when I was brewing and knowing about my bartending and background from at Canoe, I was like, you know what I'm kind of really interested in is spirits and whiskey in particular. And I had heard rumors around town that people might have a couple stills in Canada. For those of you that don't know, home distilling is not legal yet. Hopefully one day it will be. And ended up finding my way into some access of a little home still, a little still dragon 50-liter still, and started playing on that and making some whiskeys and then some vodkas, and then vodka's some neutral to then make gin. And as I was doing this, I was like, man, this is a lot more fun than brewing. I can have so much control. It's just such a cool process. And my family's originally from Scotland, so I was looking for, I wanted to get more experience in distilling. So I was looking around the province of British Columbia, which back in 2014, 2015, there weren't many craft distilleries or just distilleries in general. So wasn't able to find a role here that made sense. And I was like, well, I've got family in Scotland. I'm allowed to work and live in Scotland. Let's just see if I can get a job over there. So literally just Googled distilleries in Scotland and just started finding any email I could, and was just like, hi, this is my background, please hire me. And I sent hundreds. I wish I knew the total number, but hundreds of emails to distilleries. Most of them went unanswered. A couple of them were like, thanks, we'll keep you in mind. Had a few interviews with some places, but just my inability to just go over for an interview always hindered me. And then I got an email back from someone who was like, hey, like, you've got a really similar background to me. Would you be interested in an interview? And I was like, yeah, for sure. Like, where is your distillery? And they're like, oh, we're in Glasgow. And I was like, perfect. Like, Glasgow's in Scotland. My family was from Glasgow. Like, this would work.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah.
I got on an interview with them, and it ended up like going really well. And they offered me a role. And it was 3 weeks after getting offered that position that I ended up in Scotland working for them. And so at that distillery was able to make 3 different types of malt. So we had a single malt, like an unpeated single malt. We had a peated malt. We did a triple distilled. We made a vodka, a bunch of gins, including oak aged gins. And then just as I was leaving, we were also making rum. So spiced rum and aged rum. So that was a really good experience getting to get my hands into a lot of different categories. And then while I was there, I was kind of eyeing to come back to Canada at that point. And I just saw a job posting for to work as Master Blender, like Rachel Barrie, the Master Blender for Brown-Forman. So Glendronach, Benriach, and Glenglassaugh. She was looking for an assistant blender, and I was looking through the job resume or like requirements, and it's like, you must have gone to you have the science background and have gone to Harriet Watt. And I was like, oh man, I don't have any of this. Like, I've just been, on the wrenches brewing beer and all of that. And I was like, well, I already don't have the job. What's the worst thing that can happen if I apply? I don't get the job, no skin off my back. So threw a resume in, not going to say I forgot about it, but kind of just dismissed it. I was preparing to go on a camping trip and then moving back to Canada, and I got an interview for the job, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. Interview went well. And I was like, well, there's a lot of very good candidates out there. This is a very good job. Probably won't hear back. And got a second interview, and same thing. And then a third interview. And I was like, oh, like, huh. And then Rachel, one day, it was like big snowstorm in Glasgow in all of Scotland. This must have been 2017. And like the whole country was essentially shut down. And I'm sitting there like walking my way into work. And I got a call from Rachel being like, would you want to come be my assistant? And I was like, oh, absolutely. So yeah, I jumped at that opportunity. And yeah, I was been very fortunate to work with Rachel on Glendronach, Benriach, and Glenglassaugh, and just recently re-released the Benriach core range. So Benriach, we totally redesigned the full range from the 10s, the 12s, the 21, 25, and 30-year-old, and then a lot of tidbits along the way, and got to play with a lot of single cask selection there as well. And then just recently, in the past few months, like I mentioned earlier, I've made my way back to Canada with my partner, and we are back living on Vancouver Island. And I'm in the process with the Driftwood guys, kind of where it all started, opening a distillery with them where we plan to release rye whiskey, malt whiskey, a bourbon style, can't obviously call it bourbon here in Canada, gins, and then a plethora of other things, kind of the world's my oyster when it comes to the spirit styles there. So really looking forward to what's next.
Wow, that's very cool. I hope I can visit you on the island sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll have to get over and see the site. And we're building a brand new tasting room, massive tasting room with a little bit of a restaurant there. So you can come over and do the spirits flight, see what everything's about, and then have some food as well and see the new space. It'd be great to have you over.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brendan, I'm sure like a lot of people that are listening in right now are like super inspired by your story, since you don't have any like brewing or distilling formal education, but then you managed to work at several distilleries in Scotland just by sending emails, which is very similar to what I did. So yeah, because people do send me like messages sometimes, and they're like, how hard is it to get a job in a distillery in the UK? So now they know, like, oh, I just sent emails and you just sent a bunch of emails.
And I think that what comes into it, and you would know it just as well, because I think when we spoke, I think you ended up bouncing out to a couple other distilleries, but a lot of it is just confidence and courage that, what people will say no. It's just like, oh, well, I can move on and try someone else, because I think in this industry, there's a lot of people who are into it, a lot of people who are passionate, and if your passion comes through and you just reach out, something will click. So just, keep at it, and something will always kind of find its way to you. I find if you're putting out the right vibes and doing the right things, the opportunities will come.
Yeah, because I know when I was sending emails to distilleries, I specifically didn't contact any distilleries that were under like Diageo or Brown-Forman because I thought oh, they're such big companies. They're gonna want that formal education, like you said, like in their requirements, they usually ask for some kind of Harriet Watt or IBD training, which I didn't have at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I think what I learned was like, oh, those are suggestions. And if you come in and it's not like I went in with no experience. I had a lot of, on the ground, and I learned from incredible brewmasters and distillers. So, learning through experience versus learning through school, I, was able to parlay that, I guess, into a job. But yeah, don't ever be put off a job recommendation because you think you might not be qualified. I think the worst thing they do is say no, and that's not that bad. So yeah, just go for it. Is kind of my thought on that.
Yeah, well, very cool. So I'm sure a lot of people are very interested in your time at Brown-Forman. So what did you do there?
Absolutely. So I was brought on as the assistant blender. So what that means is that Rachel Barrie was the master blender for all three distilleries. And if you don't know who Rachel Barrie is, Rachel, I always like to say that if there was a Mount Rushmore of whiskey, Rachel would be on it twice. Rachel worked for Glenmorangie, Ardbeg, Auchentoshan, and she's got an incredible resume, and she's worked with some of the best malts in the world and a lot of my favorite malts. And so when she was brought to Brown-Forman to oversee Benriach, Glendronach, and Glenglassaugh, kind of, shook the whiskey world a little bit. It's like, oh, like big things are coming here. And so when she was looking for an assistant, I was all over that opportunity. The three distilleries, they had been all varied histories where they were shut down, reopened. So the stocks were, up and down. Glenglassaugh, especially, like not many people know about that malt, but it's an absolutely beautiful distillery. The first time I had heard of it, they had actually released an expression. It's actually, I think I might have one here. It was, just PX finishes. They did a PX finish, a port finish, and I just saw that on the Master of Malta website in the UK, and I was like, oh, like this distillery, they're doing all of these cask type finishes, and someone who wants to learn, I'm like, it's pretty interesting. I'd like to know what all of these cask types are like individually, and purchased them. I was like, these are really good. And so when Rachel had that opportunity, I was like, oh, absolutely going to jump on it. And so what my daily job looked like was first looking at the new make spirit, so the spirit that comes off the still, and just understanding where we were at. So we did a lot of new make analysis for the three distilleries and identifying trends and looking at our peated spirit and our triple distilled at Benriach. And then from that, we're working on our wood profile of what kind of wood should the spirit go into. So then we were, analyzing all of the casks that we had. So looking at our color, writing tasting notes, monitoring ABV, and then we would use that information to help form our bottlings, like for the Glendronach 12-year-old, which has, no color added or anything like that. So we just want to make sure that we're getting the right color from the casks, and we're picking the right casks to maintain a consistent product. And then with the Benriach range, we had the existing range, but as we knew we were making new ones, pulling all these new cask samples and working on blends and different ratios of different cask types, and do we inject peat into this one or not, and working with that to create a new range and then a new identity for that distillery. So very varied. You're doing new make analysis, you're doing cask analysis, you're working on forecasting on the computers, you're reporting your findings to justify, the casks that you want to buy, and then you're maintaining the quality of your bottles. And I think the best way to think of it is you are a steward of these brands. And that's what I really like about whiskey is that, when you were working, in a distillery and you're putting malt whiskey down, that's going to be used by someone in 12, 20 years down the road. So the whiskey that we were looking at, that was from 25 years ago. Or in the case of some of the stuff from Glenglassaugh, that was from the 1960s. So the person who's put that down, I'm seeing the work that they've done. And so it's a really interesting thing to be a steward of a brand, knowing the work that we are doing is really just continuing on what those have done before us. And so very rewarding experience in that sense.
Okay. Okay. So do you have to do like a lot of work in the lab then to do the testing?
Yeah, I'd say most of my time is probably spent in the lab. So either we had a lab, so we had a bottling hall, so we had 3 distilleries. They were up north, and we had a bottling hall which was near Edinburgh. And so my office was in Edinburgh, and so all the samples would come to me there, and we would do the analysis in the lab there. And then we had a little blenders lab as well, which was just kind of for the blending aspect of it. So a lot of time in the lab measuring color, ABV, and all of that.
Okay. And so, like, I don't know anything about blending really. So what do you do to come up with a recipe?
So I think, there's a world's your oyster, essentially. So what you do is for a core product, so something that's established, so Glendronach 12 sherry is one of the best sherried malts you can get. If you haven't had it, I recommend getting a bottle. And so what we're doing with that is we're just blending. We want to make sure that we're selecting casks from different age dates. So as you do your new make analysis through the year, you'll notice that even though your ingredients remain the same, the people making it remain the same, the atmosphere, the terroir of the area is changing how that whiskey is fermenting, distilling through the year. So you are getting a little bit different notes from that new make spirit in January than you would in, say, September. So when you're doing a bottling of a Glendronach 12-year-old, a core product, you want to make sure you're selecting casks from throughout the year to maintain that character that you're expecting in a 12-year-old. So when you're blending for a core product, it's just about making sure you're consistent and the flavor matches, the malts before, the releases before it, which is fun. It can be, challenging at times if you're stock deficient and certain, if you had shutdowns and all of that, but it's a fun challenge and you've got very set goalposts. When you're blending for something like Benriach's new core range, where it's just do what you want, it's a little intimidating in the sense, there's so many options, and Benriach is probably, I'd say, the most experimental distillery in Scotland. They've got a history of triple distilled malt into the 90s. They've peated malt from the 80s, unpeated malt. So not many distilleries were experimenting to the extent that Benriach has for as long as Benriach has. Nowadays, it's common to see everyone doing kind of everything, but Benriach's been doing it for such a long time. So we have all of these tools in our shed, and it's what are we going to build and how are we going to do it? And so for that, what I like to think of is, yes, cast types are important and definitely, but it's listening to the spirit. What does the spirit want to go into? And so what shines about Benriach? So how do we bring forward those orchard fruits? So what you're doing then is you're finding cast types that complement the distillery character, which that orchard fruits, that just very juicy, delicious Speyside malt. And you're picking casks that help amplify that character, but are unique in their own sense. So you do have to understand what everyone else is doing. So you want to make a malt that's unique to you, but also true to your spirit. We don't want to go in and just put everything in heavy sherry and then just say, oh, there we go, because that's not true to what that spirit wants to do. I'm sure it would be good, but we want it to be uniquely Benriach. So you're playing with the levels of that to make sure that the distillery character shines through and is complemented by the wood rather than the wood dominating it. And then you're working on just a progression. So the way I like to describe the new Benriach range is if you're walking from a valley up the mountain. So the 10-year-old's a little bit lighter. And then as you work your way up through the 12, you're like, oh, it's just a lot more dark fruits. This is wonderful. And you get to the 21 and it's like you're kind of starting to see over the valley, a little bit more refined fruits. And then when you work your way up to the 30, you're seeing everything. There's so much flavor. It's like a hint of peat that's just mellowed into these tropical fruits. So it is this journey. And what you want to do when you're blending is make sure that journey stays true to the form of the distillery and that it's, a unique expression in itself.
Okay, so you helped to develop this new range, right? You said at Benriach. And then how do you decide when it's good enough? Like, who makes those decisions on the flavor?
So when we decide a recipe, so what we would do is essentially I'd go into the lab and play with a bunch of different, kind of variations, and Rachel would have some ideas. And so I'd go and make those ones and we'd look. And so we'd put them all out and we'd look and we would go through. And you just kind of sense check and you kind of figure out where you want to be. And, we've got whiskey panels that work as well. And then because Brown-Forman's such a big company. Brown-Forman's the same company that owns Jack Daniels. We have a giant lab in the US, and they've got a full spirits, 60 persons like tasting panel. So we can
60 persons.
Yeah, so we can send samples to them and have them kind of map them out. We won't tell them what they are, and we'll see kind of where people are going. But for the most part, Rachel and I are looking at our wood inventory and knowing our tastes and what we think the consumer will like. And we're slowly kind of whittling it down. When we get into when you're close to the finish line, that's when we'll start, playing with the minutia of percents and then the ABV as well. And that's when you're starting to look with what ABV makes the most sense for this expression. And you're thinking about flavor first and foremost and quality. And then you're thinking about, where is this going? What are people going to want? Do they want a very high ABV whiskey, or is this going to be a lighter whiskey that, maybe they want a little bit lower ABV and it's maybe intended for having in a cocktail or something like that. So these are all things that you're thinking about as you final in on that final recipe. And when you have that final recipe, there is no, oh yeah, like this is it, this is right. It just clicks. It's instantly like you have it and you're like, poof, this is it. It blows you away. Usually my tasting notes when I do it, like I've got I'd have my little book here, and it'll just be like, I'll be doing something and it will just, I'll just put like a smiley face emoji or something. I'll be like, yeah, nope, that's it. Like, this is the one. That's how we know. And you just, when you have it, and I think that's the best way. And kind of the art of blending is you just know.
Okay. And how long was that process to develop a new recipe from start to finish?
I think a year and a half, probably. A little bit longer from like conception of like, this is what we're going to do. And then a year and a half of like very focused recipe development.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So a very fun process. Getting paid to sample and drink whiskey is a very, very good job.
Yeah, I bet. Oh gosh. And then so your new this new recipe, when is it in stores?
It's out now. So if you're in if you're in the United States, should be at all of your retailers. If you're in British Columbia, you can go to the British Columbia liquor stores there and some specialist retailers. If you're in the United Kingdom, Europe, emerging Asia, or like Australia, it should also be pretty much everywhere. So you can look for it. It's beautiful blue eggshell bottles. Benriach 10, smoky 10, 12, smoky 12, and then the core range will be the aged range will be more at specialists, and that's the 21, 25, and the 30.
Okay. But which ones were the ones that you, like the new recipe?
All of them. So we completely did the new range. Yeah. And so there's going to be, not sure if the other two have been released yet, so we'll tease them. There are going to be a couple other ones that come there that find their way through to the distillery shop as well. So if you're in Scotland, definitely go check out the new Benriach tasting range. But yeah, that full new range was kind of the work of Rachel. And then with, I got to obviously help out on there for the past year and a half. So very happy to see that on shelves.
Do people get like super impressed when you tell them you're like a whiskey blender?
I was at the store the other day and I don't think they believed me because I was picking up some Glenglassaugh because I wanted to show people at home and stuff. So I went and I was like, grabbed a bunch. They're like, oh yeah, like, what do you know about these? I'm like, oh, I made them. And they just like look at me and they're like, what is this guy? What is this guy smoking? So yeah, no, really, really fun. And yeah, it's always rewarding to see your products on the shelf and see people tasting it for the first time is always nice. And when we relaunched that Benriach, got to do a tasting in Edinburgh, and it was really fun just to watch people kind of have it for the first time, and very rewarding to see how people enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so for the Benriach, after you blended it, does it go into the bottle or like back into a cask to marry?
Yeah, so there's a bit of both. So we would kind of blend it for bottling, and then a portion of that might go back into cask to be saved for the next blending of that expression.
Okay. I just want to head over to. I have some subscriber questions that I want to ask you.
Perfect.
So John Hardy asks, "I'm interested about the cuts. These whiskeys get a long barrel maturation cycle, and thus deeper into the fuel tails, or not?"
So it's a great question, and every distillery will be different. So how far you go into your your feints, your tails. That's definitely going to decide what your spirit character is. And so for every distillery will be different. Some distilleries where you want a lighter spirit, you'll have a very narrow cut. When I worked at that first distillery in Scotland, what we actually did was started designing our cut points at different times of the year for different styles of whiskey. So as a new distillery, we knew that we would want to be able to release something at 3 years old, 5 years old, and then stuff that we definitely wanted to sit for 8, 12, 15, 20 years. And so we started adjusting our cut points there. So for the spirits that we wanted to be released fairly soon, we were doing pretty narrow cuts. And then for the spirits that we wanted to age out in our peated whiskey, we were going a little bit deeper. And then we knew that those ones would be saved for a longer maturation. So absolutely, you can use that to decide your distillery character.
And around when do you make the cuts, or are you not allowed to say?
It totally depends on each distillery. Some distilleries, are very high, in the high 60s. I think Macallan's really, really narrow up. I'm going to say that they're actually nearer 70. Some places go down as low as 55-ish. So yeah, we were kind of in between those points kind of deal. So definitely not that high and not quite that low. So just, kind of in that range of the sweet spot of your hearts.
Okay, thank you. All right, so next question from Vial B2. What were some technical differences between these distilleries in terms of making product? So the material, stills, base grain, aging process, and what was different working from one to another?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. And I think that's something that really drew me to the role rather than working for one distillery and having that as the one focus, was the ability to have 3 distilleries to play with and to learn and understand each one. So in Scotland, for single malt, essentially all the distilleries are getting their malt and their yeast from the same sources. So those were kind of constant. So those raw ingredients were constant. Mm-hmm. What really gives you your character difference in single malt will be the design of your stills. So the shape of your stills, your fermentation time, your fermentation vessels, and then just where you're located. If you were to take Glendronach, where it's sitting right now, and if you were to move it up the hill with all of the same equipment, the same people, the same ingredients, the same water, it would change. So it's very much a sense of place. The place is an ingredient while creating this whiskey. And so understanding that and understanding how that's reacting and forming the new make spirit, that's where you get to come in, and that's where your wood plan comes in. So what is your wood strategy for each distillery? So, Glendronach is a very old world malt. So it's sherry, old world wines. That's a ethos. That's the ethos of what Glendronach is. It's a very base heavy spirit, like old saxophone shaped stills into those deep, deep casks. Glenglassaugh is on the sea. It's a coastal malt, very expressive, pineapple, guava, incredible. So casks swing a little bit more. We've got, rum, red wine, things that you would expect with those flavors. And then Benriach, it's right at the, right in Speyside. And it's so malleable. It works well with so many things, which is why it's, been why they have the triple distilled, the unpeated, the own maltings, which is an incredible expression, and the peated malt. So with that distillery, it's managing different cask types to express that distillery's character the most. So yeah, you're using understanding the sense of place as an ingredient, I guess, the building itself, the facility, and then your wood plan would be the main kind of components that we get to shape and form.
Okay, and what is the wood plan for casks?
Yeah, so what you're working on is just understanding what you want your bottled spirit to be and how many casks are you bringing in. So are you going to use mainly, bourbon casks? Are you going to use virgin oak? So, a cask that has not seen bourbon yet. Are you going to use sherry casks? If so, what type of sherry? Are you using Pedro Jimenez? Are you using Oloroso? Maybe you've got some port casks in there, some rum casks. And so your wood plan is just what casks are you buying to fill into whiskey? And then if you have a lot of bourbon casks, are you going to re-rack? So are you going to take, let's say, 5 bourbon casks, dump them into a vat, and then refill them into a sherry cask? Is that going to be part of your wood plan? So your policy is just how are you using wood to achieve the character that you want. And so for every distillery, it's different. You know, there are some distilleries in Scotland that they only use one wood type because that's what, you know, is best for their distillery. There is no right and wrong with wood plants, and that's the beauty. It's just what's right for your distillery.
And how many times would a cask get used typically?
So typically, you know, after 4 times, we would not use them again. But to say that cask would be used 4 times, not every cask is used 4 times. And then sometimes it might only be in there for, you know, the first 2 or 3 years, and then it will be put into another cask. But a cask's life, we wouldn't, after 4 years, that it wouldn't be seen again. But especially at Glendronach, we relied so heavily on first fill casks. So once that cask was used once, we could move it to another distillery, but it was pretty much not used at Glendronach again.
Okay. So do you ever try to like rejuvenate the cask by like scraping off the inside char layer and then recharring it and using it again?
So I've seen and I've tried some expressions with that done. My experience with them has been it's a lot of work, and you could just buy a new cask. And it definitely works for some people in some spirits. We didn't do it that much. Just the labor to do that and what you gained, it was always kind of just seen as better to just buy a new cask.
Okay.
I do have a little mini cask behind me, which I do plan to do that too, though. So I can report back on how that works on my little mini cask.
Do you get a lot of free whiskey working at Brown-Forman?
We had like an allowance, like I think most kind of big distilleries do, which was always nice. So I was always able to kind of pick up a couple bottles a year of things that I would like. And I would usually spend, like, this is our 30-year-old, something that would be a little bit out of my price point. So I was able to get that on my allowance. So little things like that. It's really nice to have, and momentums of where you've worked and projects you've been a part of. Absolutely.
Whoa, they just gave you a bottle of 30-year-old whiskey?
Yeah, I had a couple 30s and 35s, so really nice to have those in the collection.
What is your allowance per year to take?
Kind of varied, I think, depending on your role in the company and how long you had been there. So there was a kind of a monetary value based on that. So
it's monetary.
Yeah. Yeah, so you would buy it, like, technically out of your allowance kind of deal. So yeah, it was a good way to do it.
Oh, that's cool. What other perks are there working at Brown-Forman?
Well, Brown-Forman is an incredible company. So they have so many kind of sites across the world. So, Jack Daniel's, Woodford, Old Forester, Dora, Finlandia, Slane Whisky. So you've got this at your disposal. All of these resources and opportunities to travel and see them. And one of my most memorable trips was going to Slane Castle with a bunch of the European new hires for the year. So it brought all of the new people who had just been hired at Brown-Forman and put them up at the castle. So we got to try all of Brown-Forman's products and tour Slane Castle and see Sir Alex Cunningham's, the back rock garden, which is incredible in Slane Castle. For those of you who don't know, it's in Ireland, and it's a rock venue. It's been, it's where if there's a concert that's worth going to, it's been hosted at Slane Castle, and they've turned what used to be the horse stables into a distillery. So they make Irish whiskey there. An absolutely beautiful spot. And then, of course, when you get into the US, you've got Jack Daniel's, Woodford, and then the new Old Forester distillery, which is coming back. So it's, lots of opportunities to travel, to visit, and to grow. Very good at promoting, internally and giving you chances to develop. So very, very good company to work for.
Yeah. I guess is it very easy for you to, if you wanted to work in the States at Jack Daniel's, would that be very easy for you to do with your contacts now?
With contacts, I think as a Canadian, without the ability to work in the US, there might be an issue there. But if I ever figured that out, it's a very good company and made a lot of good contacts. So yeah, if I ever wanted to have my hand at making whiskey in the US, or I think I'd have the right people to talk to.
All right. Okay, moving on. Next question from Madge Nima. Is keeping the mash recipe simple better than having many different grains and many different roast levels?
And so that's a question that I will be kind of focusing on more on in my new role at Driftwood. So in Scotland, we made single malt. So all of our mashes were the same. We just used malt. So there was no variation there to be a single malt. But at Driftwood, what I'll be doing is actually using a lot of different malts and a lot of different recipes. And what that's part of as we're finding our character and seeing what works best for our stills and our taste profile, it's great to have those tools in the shed. You'll never regret having those things. And I think once we find our niche, we might start focusing in on more. Like I'm a big fan of rye whiskeys, so I can see us using a lot of rye. But when you see places like Four Roses or some of the big companies that actually source out a lot of their whiskey, it's having all of these products available gives you just so many more options of things to make. So I'm a big fan of having different combinations. And then one of the beautiful things about Canadian whiskey tradition is that a lot of the times we would, in Canada historically, distill all of our grains separately. So we're allowed to use enzymes here in Canada, where in Scotland you weren't. So an enzyme just helps the yeast break down all of the fermentable sugar, so you get a higher alcohol yield. So we can actually ferment 100% corn, 100% rye, wheat, and barley. And that means that though my mash bill might just be 100% wheat, it means I'd have an inventory of wheat, corn, rye, malt, and I could actually then blend that in the barrel and then put that back into cask kind of deal. So you're able to kind of play with your mash bill while it's maturing, which I'm really excited to see how that works.
Sorry, so you're mashing these things separately or together?
You can. So we'll probably do a little bit of both. Definitely going to do some where they're mashed together, and then literally just because I want to see what it's like, I'm going to do a bunch of them separately and then blend them afterwards and see what the differences are. So what will a 75% rye, then split corn and malt recipe taste like as a mash bill, and then what would that taste like if I just blended them separately and see, is there a difference? And that's something I'm really excited to see how that comes along. And definitely keep your eyes on Driftwood Spirits, because we'll be releasing that in the next 3 to 5 years.
All right. Yeah, I'll have to check back with you and see how it all went down.
Absolutely.
But if you have like a corn, malt, rye whiskey, what does that classify as?
So it would depend on your percentages. So in Canada, we just call it whiskey. I think technically in Canada, you can call anything you do rye. And that might just be a myth. But so we will be pretty much very open of, this is what we've been using. If we do a single malt, we'll say it's a single malt. If we're doing a blended malt, we would say that we were doing a blended malt. And for our rye whiskeys, you can be rest assured that they will be very high rye.
The last question from Jason Bellevue. Yes. Favorite grain to use and why?
So yeah, it's a great question. I think I might have tipped off in the previous answer there, but single malt's incredible and I love it, and it's so expressive, and every malt released by any distillery is going to be so unique and have so much character. But as a Canadian, kind of growing up with the Canadian folklore and all of that, I'm very drawn to rye whiskeys. And I think just with, Canadian whiskey maybe historically doesn't have the best reputation in the world, but, Northern Harvest did win, Jim Murray's, that's a rye whiskey, best whiskey of the year. Alberta Premium just did it again. Those of you that like Whistle Pig will know that that's Canadian rye whiskey. So I want to play with rye a lot more. I just think there's a lot there, and it's a very, very delicious product. So yeah, really excited to play with rye. Have
you had any trouble mashing with the rye?
Not yet. So it's going to be definitely a battle. It's you have to definitely not as efficient and easy as full malt. So it's lots of playing. What we're looking at doing at Driftwood is actually getting some mash tun fermenters, so we can ferment on grain, so that we don't have to worry about running off. So it's kind of designing our equipment to work best for what we want to do. So I'm hoping in the next year and a bit we'll have some open top fermenters that are mash tun / fermenters. So you'll definitely have to come by and check those out.
Okay. So these fermenters that you're fermenting on the grain, so you're also distilling on the grain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does that work though? Because isn't that like there's like a lot of solid material. So is it very difficult to transfer from the fermenter into the still? Does it get clogged?
It can be. There's a couple of different types of pumps that you can use that can aid with it. So if some of the bigger breweries, like at Driftwood, we have it's called Pondorf pump, so it can pump literally anything anywhere. And so if you use one of those, what it does is it's actually like a hammer almost, and it's just going like this and pushing the material, whether it be solid or liquid, through your plumbing. So it can be done. And then if we have to look at other ways, then you be sure that I will to make sure that we get it into the still.
Okay, that's very cool. And then when you're distilling on the grain and you're disposing of the waste, because you've got the grain and the pot ale mixed together, so it's very watery. So do you have to separate out the solids and the liquid when you're getting rid of it?
As of right now, no. We've got the spent grain silos where all of it would be going to anyway. So it's just going to the same spot to be then moved off site and treated.
Okay. So is it very dry though, or is it very
liquidy? Yeah. Yeah. But luckily we have the benefit too of going into the same silos that our brewery does. So their bed's a little, like, quite a bit drier, obviously, because it's not soaked with pot ale.
Oh, I see.
So the water kind of can absorb in there.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And what is your title at Driftwood now?
I've got to pick it myself, so it's a head of spirit creation. Just kind of So we'll be doing a lot of things. So I think it's going to be a little bit more than just distilling and blending. We're going to be going. We will have limoncellos. We will do fruited spirits. We'll have a lot of different styles of spirit, and then the beauty about not having any kind of rules and regulation. Single malt. If you want to be Scotch whiskey, you have to follow certain rules to be Scotch whiskey. But we're starting a brand new distillery here in Canada, where if we want to make gin, if we want to make spirits using botanicals that no one's used, I think if you look at Empirical, the distillery in Denmark, there, like what they're doing, and they're just kind of creating their own new categories, very much in the similar boat of, it's like, if we find something that we want to make, or if I find a botanical that I'm passionate about after doing a micro distillation, and if we want to release a product, we'll do that. So it's just a open canvas, essentially, of exploring flavor and the possibilities, and just using all of the tools that we have. We've got this wonderful new brewery. We've got a sour beer program. We've got an aged beer program, and now this distillery. So how can we let, all of this work together, but then how can we use each other as well? And what can I learn from the brewery and the sour program and the barrel age program, and what can they learn from me? So it's going to be a very collaborative effort in tying all of it in together.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, Brendan. Bye.